So the psalmist, King David, is facing a time of intense opposition, and what he is experiencing in his life would give many of us sleepless nights. And it's causing him to have distress, it's causing him to face humiliation, it's causing him to feel lonely. Now, it doesn't take a genius to recognize that if you're facing the kind of distress that David is facing here, that there's a potential to have your sleep life affected. But look at what David says at the end of this psalm, if you have your Bibles with you, in verse 8. He says, "In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." So David isn't tossing and turning at night thinking about this dark situation, but we find that he is sleeping peacefully. And the question is, how in the world is he doing that? I mean, I don't know about you, but I found some of these sleep medications to be quite frightening. So, sometimes you look at the medicine bottle and you read the caution label and it says, hey, if you want to get rid of your headache, you can take this. But in consequence, you might have some liver damage, or you might have some sort of strange side effect, some seizures, some internal bleeding. It might mess up your golf game, whatever it may be. And you think to yourself, man, I just want to get rid of my headache. Well, I want to assure you that the prescription that the psalmist gives us here is actually worth it. And the prescription that he gives us for having a good night's sleep is to trust in God. The great theme of this psalm is to trust. And I want to spend just a few minutes discovering what trust in God looks like, practically speaking. So we should have some lessons for you up on the screen. The first lesson is we trust God by turning our anxieties over to Him in prayer. We trust God by turning our anxieties over to Him in prayer. Look at the first verse. "Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer." So what do we see in verse 1? We see David's prayer. And two things I want to note about this prayer. Firstly, it is directed towards the God of my righteousness. Perhaps a better way to understand it is my righteous God. David calls upon his righteous God. This is noteworthy because in an environment in which everything is seemingly going wrong for David, he is calling out to his God, who is one that does everything right. Do you notice that in your text? Look at verse 2. It says, "O men, how long shall my honor be turned into shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lives? Selah. But know that the Lord has set apart the godly for Himself. The Lord hears when I call to Him." So one of the things that David is so burdened by in this particular psalm is the loss of his reputation. He has been humiliated by people's words and by people's actions. How long, he says, shall my honor be turned into shame? David, as a man, used to be seen as great among men. He was honored, he was loved, he was the great king. But everything has changed now. His reputation has been slandered. He's no longer respected as the king, and it has crushed him. What does he say? He says, how long? The idea is enough is enough. How long do I have to deal with this? And I wonder if any of us feel like David in some respect this morning. You were once in a well-respected position in society. You were thought of very highly. Now your reputation has been marred. Maybe colleagues at work see you in a different light, maybe even because of your faith. Maybe you used to have an abundance of friends, but now you feel lonely, you feel abandoned, you feel misrepresented perhaps. Like David, you don't even believe that you should be known in this way. It's all lies. This is not who you really are. What's interesting is that what stands out in this psalm is that David does not allow the words of these people to affect his trust in God. He knows that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. He hears when I call. In other words, you oppressors, you are troubling the wrong person. I have God's ear. Friends, those that oppress us within our lives, they seem to have a great power to really affect us in a negative way. But David, he says, listen, I can see through you. I can see your lies. I can see your vain words. I will not be intimidated by them because when I call upon the Lord, I have his ear. He hears me. He was set apart as a godly man for God himself. Now that word godly, it's an interesting word. It doesn't mean perfect, but it means faithful to God. Those who confess their sins and attempt to live a life that is pleasing to the Lord. That even when they fall, as righteous people, they get back up again. Malachi, the great prophet, God speaks through him and he calls his people his treasured possession. We are set apart for him. So firstly, it's not only important to recognize that David's prayer is directed towards God in this psalm, but secondly, it's important to recognize that he's calling out to God during a time of great distress. You know, for some people, prayer is just a way of getting things off your chest. You know, voicing your concerns. The idea is that if you just get things off your chest, that maybe you'll feel better. But that's not what prayer is for David. He says, answer me when I call. He expects God to do something within his life. He expects him to change things. And some of us, if we're really honest, we can be tempted to think to ourselves that God's not really there to answer us. And that mindset needs to change. Too many of us, we doubt that God's ear is graciously open to us and that he's actually willing to help us and to encourage us and to answer us in the midst of our pain. He is willing to give relief. You know, relief is a wonderful thing, is it not? To feel relieved. The idea behind this word relief is that the psalmist has felt that he has been in a tight spot. Claustrophobic even. And he's wanting relief. He's wanting a wider space in order to be able to live. He's seeking relief in his trouble. So what does he do? He decides to turn his gaze to the Lord, to his King. My friends, how many burdens do we carry that we don't need to? You know, I often wonder to myself, how much money would insurance companies and employers and we ourselves save in therapy and in medication if we simply just came to the Lord in prayer? Now, once again, I'm not suggesting that therapy and medication are not suitable treatments. Many Christians have been helped by them. I'm simply wondering how much of that could have been avoided if we simply came to our Father in prayer. I'm reminded of the great hymn writer when he says, "Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear, all because we do not carry everything to God in prayer." I mean, what does Jesus say after all? Come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest. Relief is such a wonderful thing, and some of us could have the relief that we long to have, but we don't ask God for it. We don't seek his face. We're just kind of standing in a corner thinking and trying to handle all of these things by ourselves, and we're reflecting upon the pain and wondering to ourselves, what are we going to do? All the while we've completely neglected going to the Creator of the universe. Jesus invites us to pray, doesn't he? What does he say? Ask, seek, knock. Here's the second lesson. We trust God by not allowing the antagonism of others to affect our confidence in him. We trust God by not allowing the antagonism of others to affect our confidence in him. I love that when you go to the cinema, I don't know if you guys do it the same way here, but it used to be that if you wanted to see a movie in the States, that you would have to go and show up early and hope you get a ticket, and you'd have to wait in some long line. I may date myself here, but I love the Lord of the Rings movies. And back in the early 2000s, I remember going to the cinema and waiting in line for hours and hours and hours on the first day because I wanted to be able to see the movie. I want to be able to get there and get a good seat. Well, now it's the case that you're able to reserve your seats online. I'm sure you can do that here as well in the UK. And it makes things so much better. You can buy your ticket online. You can show right up exactly when the movie's about to show. Your seat has been reserved. It is your seat. Nobody can take it from you. Well, there's a bit of the same thing here. David says that the godly are set apart for God himself. They are reserved for him. They belong to him. So no one else can put their hands on the believer without God's permission. We are reserved. We are set apart for him. And that is a truth. That is a truth that I think that we need to be reminded of today. I think some of us, we don't really like ourselves. Maybe we wish that we looked a different way. Maybe we wish that we were like another person. Maybe we wish that we could change some things about our lives. We could rewrite some things a bit differently. Maybe we're embarrassed of who we are. And we think to ourselves that we're not special in any kind of way. My friends, be encouraged. You are set apart. You are set apart for God himself. You belong to him. You are special. Here's the next lesson. We trust God by living properly towards the Lord. We trust God by living properly towards the Lord. What does verse 4 say? Be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. So notice throughout the psalm that David's oppressors are offering him words of shame and of dishonor, while David takes a moment to offer his oppressors wise words of instructions. What does he say? He tells them what a faithful life is like. He tells them how to live properly for the Lord. Firstly, he says, be angry and do not sin. The implication is that you can be angry while at the same time not sin. But you can also have an anger that leads to sin. And we need to figure out what that balance is. We never want to have that unrighteous anger. David wants his oppressors to lie down at night and ponder in their own hearts and in their own beds and be silent. What does that mean? It means at the end of the day, examine your life. Ponder in your own heart. These fellas, they're laying down at night and they're angry with David or they're angry with other people, and it's leading them to lie. It's leading them to sin. It's leading them to live evil lives. How many of us toss and turn at night and we're thinking about people that hurt us? You know, we're reenacting conversations at night, with someone in our head that hurt us or that really bothered us, and it's causing us to be angry, and it's leading us to have evil thoughts. It leads us to scheming, to having consequences that, to the point that we're never even able to get to sleep. David says, let's not toss and turn and behave sinfully in our beds. Let us examine our hearts and our beds. Let us be silent before the Lord. Secondly, he says, offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. That implies that there is to be no wedge that is driven between conduct in worship and conduct in our daily lives, in our lifestyle. True trust in God was accompanied by sacrifices that were laid out in the law, that were laid out in the Torah. And what do we find later in the New Testament? What does Jesus come along and say? He says, if you love me, obey my commandments. The lesson then is that if you trust in God, you will live a certain way. When we belong to God, it changes absolutely everything about how we live. It changes our values. It changes our priorities. It changes our lifestyle. Your faith in God should change your work life. Your trust in God should affect your romantic life. Your trust in God should affect your thought life. It should reflect how you relate to others. It should reflect how you engage in your hobbies. The fact that you love Jesus should affect how you live the entirety of your life. And perhaps some of us are living in such a way that it doesn't appear that we trust God at all. David, he calls for these oppressors, whoever they are, to trust God by living properly for the Lord. And I think that we should take David's words here and reflect upon them. Do we live a life that tells other people that we trust in God? Do we live that life? If you trust God, it will be seen in your actions. But do you see what David is doing here? David trusts God, and because of that, it allows him to have a good night's sleep. And now he's holding out the prescription for a good night's sleep to his oppressors. Trust God and live for Him. Here's the next lesson. We trust God by finding joy in Him more so than our circumstances. We trust God by finding joy in Him more so than in our circumstances. Look at verse 6, if you will. There are many who say, "Who will show us some good? Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord. You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound." So David contrasts his trust in the Lord with other people's lostness. He says, many people are out there and they're looking for answers, and they say, who can show us any good? That is, which God is out there that can help us? What deity is there that can change our lives for the better? Who will show us some good? And what do we have here? David, he knows the answer. He says it is God Himself. So he prays, "Let the light of your face shine upon us, O Lord. Don't hide your face from us. Lift up the light of your face upon us." That means, may you be pleased with us. May we be in a right relationship with you. You see, David has experienced what so many people in the world have not experienced. So many people in the world, and this may even be us, we are searching for joy in all of the wrong places. If we attempt to find joy solely in the circumstances of life, I want to tell you that the Bible is telling us that we are missing out. This is why Paul says in his letter to the Philippians in Philippians 4, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice." So understand that the joy that Paul is talking about does not come from outward circumstances. If our joy only derived from outward circumstances, then when circumstances go bad, that means that our joy will disappear. But no, the Christian joy that Paul speaks about is the Lord Himself. Think about when Paul wrote the letter to the Philippians. Do you know where he wrote it? He wrote it in prison. He was in prison and he was facing a possible death sentence. This is not read or said superficially. The rejoicing he is writing about has not been given to the outward circumstances of life. Security, success, good health, wealth, popularity, sexual intimacy. The rejoicing that he is writing about is not given to the outward circumstances of life. Therefore, our joy cannot be taken by the outward circumstances of life. We may fall. We may fall into times of grief, into terrible sorrow. The circumstances may get bad. They do get bad. I'm not denying that, and neither is Paul. But there is always to be a joy in the Lord that never leaves us. We can always rejoice in the Lord because unlike our circumstances, the God of this world does not change. Therefore, as Christians, because of our relationship with Him, we can always have joy, like an inextinguishable pilot light. We're always joyful. The key to a crushed and bitter spirit that has come about because of the harsh circumstances of life is to dwell upon the Lord Jesus Christ and rejoice in Him. I mean, look at your text. This is what David is saying. There's no joy like the joy of the Lord. He says, you've put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound. I love this. God is the one that has put joy in David's heart. So notice that it wasn't put there by anybody else. It is God that has given him more joy than anybody else could provide for them. Don't get me wrong. Yes, it is possible to find joy in the circumstances of our lives. Yes, it is. But just know that to take that path is to take second best. Nothing can provide you with the joy, the lasting joy that Jesus Christ brings. Here's our last lesson. Trust God by acknowledging that He is our ultimate security. Trust God by acknowledging that He is our ultimate security. How does the psalm end? Look at verse 8. In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. David could look at everything in his life that is completely falling apart, and he can still put his head on his pillow, and he could fall asleep. David can lie down peacefully because the Lord makes him dwell in safety. Who is David's security? Is it the locks on his doors? Is it the dog that he has in his backyard? Is it the muscles or the skill that he has in battle? Is it his position in society? Is it his bank account? Is it the weapons that he has that he carries? No. God is his security. God is his safety. It is in God whom David trusts with his entire life. You know, I find it interesting. The Bible should never be read as just this book with a bunch of different morals. The Bible is a storyline that tells us of Jesus Christ and how He came to save humanity. And what we find here is that one day in the future, years and years after David writes this psalm, a son of David comes. And his name is Jesus. And he exemplifies this Psalm 4 trust. Yes, he suffers anxiety about his trial in Jerusalem, but in his sufferings, he submitted to the Father's will in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he experiences that peace of mind that the psalmist articulates here as Jesus went to the cross. My friends, you can trust God, and you can still be put through the ringer. You can trust God. Eventually, you'll still die. But God promises us. He promises us not that we won't go to the grave, but He promises us that we will be raised up from the grave. Nicholas Ridley was burnt to the stake for his faith during the period of the Reformation. Apparently, his brother came to visit him when he was in jail, and he knew that the next day that he was going to give his life for the sake of the gospel, that he was going to be killed. And his brother came to visit him, and he said, I want to sleep here outside, and I want to pray for you. And he looked towards his brother, and he said, hey, just go home. And he quoted Psalm 4. And he said, I will lie down and sleep in peace, for God alone will make me dwell in safety. I wonder today, could we take the prescription that Psalm 4 lays out for us? Could we trust the Lord with our entire lives? Could we trust the Lord with this church? Can we trust the Lord with our families? Can we trust the Lord with our own life and our own sufferings? I think that if you and I begin to take the Psalm 4 prescription of trusting in Him, maybe we too will be able to say like David, in peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. Let's go ahead and pray. Lord, I'm sure that in a crowd of this size, that there are people that are hurting, that there are people that are experiencing tremendous pain. Lord, I pray that by your grace, you would help us trust you. That by your grace, you could encourage our hearts. That we could examine ourselves. And the Lord, all of our difficulties that we shoulder, that we carry as nothing but burdens, will you lift those off of us? Could we truly trust in you so that we could have a good night's sleep? Could we truly trust in you? Lord, I want to ask if there are people here today that don't know you, that they don't know Jesus as their personal Savior. I would ask that you would work in their lives today, and that they would come to saving faith in you, that they would come to trust you, that they would believe in the work that your Son Jesus did on the cross, that they would trust you and live their lives dedicated to you.